The so-called Freedom Convoy in Ottawa, Ontario, the capital of Canada, is something foremost on everyone's minds. It's, again, history in the making, as I think I've said before. So this week on Don't Talk TV, I'm going to revisit that again. I'm going to look at the law a bit more to further reiterate my view that the protests are completely legal. We'll talk about the police seizing fuel and food from people who are in Ottawa. And we'll talk about one arrest that's gained a lot of attention and my tips on how you should interact with police. Hello, my name's Nicholas Wansbutter. I'm a criminal defense lawyer in Stratford, Ontario, Canada, and welcome to Don't Talk TV. So as I mentioned last week, I just want to remind viewers that this Friday, February the 11th, I'll be heading down to Ottawa. I'll be there Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and I'll be doing a lot of extra content. We're going to try and do some live streaming and a bunch of extra videos, so keep an eye on this channel. I recommend that you subscribe, because at least if you're watching on YouTube, I've noticed that it's really hard to find live streams as a bit of a way of shadow banning, but if you're subscribed, then you'll get notifications when I go live. So last week I talked about our rights as guaranteed under Section 2 of the Charter, the right to freedom of association, the right to freedom of peaceful assembly, the right to freedom of expression. I've been challenged on that by some of my colleagues in the legal profession who insist that this is an unlawful protest, and one individual pointed me to Section 63 of the Criminal Code of Canada on unlawful assemblies and expressed the view that the Freedom Convoy falls afoul of this section of the Criminal Code. So let's take a look at that first. Then, as I said in the introduction, we're going to look quickly at the question of police confiscating fuel, and then we'll look at an arrest of a gentleman for refusing to provide identification, and my commentary or my tips on how you should behave when you're dealing with police. So looking firstly at Section 63 of the Criminal Code, I'm on the Government of Canada Justice Laws website. And notice firstly that unlawful assembly falls under offenses against public order with the subheading unlawful assemblies and riots. So there's a clear contextual connection between unlawful assemblies and riots, as we'll see. So Section 63 says that an unlawful assembly is an assembly of 3 or more persons who, with intent to carry out any common purpose, assemble in such a manner or so conduct themselves that they are assembled as to cause persons in the neighborhood of the assembly to fear on reasonable grounds that they, the people assembled, will disturb the peace tumultuously, or that they will by that assembly needlessly and without reasonable cause provoke other persons to disturb the peace tumultuously. And if we look down a bit further, Section 64 defines a riot, and I think this is important to look at because riot uses the same terminology. A riot is an unlawful assembly that has begun to disturb the peace tumultuously. So an unlawful assembly is one where there's an intention to disturb the peace tumultuously, essentially an intent to riot, or circumstances where it's reasonably feared that a riot will occur, and a riot is where that breaching of the peace tumultuously has already begun to occur. Let's look quickly at a couple of cases. The first one is an Ontario Court of Justice decision, Her Majesty the Queen and Nicholas Cote. So just to give a bit of context to what this case is all about, the circumstances of offenses are that Mr. Cote is a political anarchist. A major focus for him during these protests was to participate with others in tearing down a fence put up in downtown Toronto that to him symbolized the separation of elite politicians from ordinary citizens. With that admitted criminal intent, he had accompanied his fiancée on June the 26th, 2010, initially in a peaceful labor protest that turned violent. He did so knowing the Black Bloc intended to join the march and anticipated their breaking out and moving towards the hated fence in order to tear it down. Mr. Cote brought the black camouflage dress that symbolized this international anarchist group, intending to blend in with it, hide his identity, and join with it in its destructive intent. I think it's worth noting also that he had pled guilty to a number of offenses, willfully damaging 2 police cars, one with a wooden stick, the other by kicking in the window of a second cruiser. So with that background, let's look at what paragraphs 13 and following say about unlawful assembly. It says that to establish the factual basis for unlawful assembly, Section 63, sub 1 requires that there be 3 or more persons involved with a common purpose in such a manner as to cause this reasonable fear that they will breach the peace tumultuously or provoke others. So in this regard, they note that Mr. Cote admitted bringing a disguise in order to blend in with the black bloc, in order to provide cover for what the court inferred he anticipated might be the infliction of property damage. So you had that intent of property damage clearly ahead of time. And as the court found at paragraph 16, it is a matter of common sense to conclude that the common purpose of the black bloc and those others who attach themselves to its tactics, including the accused, as a round down the street smashing property caused fear in reasonable people lawfully engaged in protest and disturbed the peace of the city. Know that they're running down the street smashing property. So let's look at a second case. A Supreme Court decision, Herfleming versus Ontario 2019 Supreme Court. I think this is a useful decision for, again, considering that tumultuous breach of the peace. And also in the context of looking at what is causing a disturbance, which is a lesser offense than tumultuously breaching the peace. So viewers may remember this case is the one where a gentleman with a Canadian flag attended as a counter-protester to an Indigenous blockade, and he was arrested by police. As the Supreme Court discusses here at paragraph 6, they said that the state claimed that, according to the common law doctrine that requires police to keep the peace, there's a common law power for police to arrest an individual in Mr. Fleming's circumstances in order to prevent an apprehended breach of the peace. And as the court says later, I will refer to this power as the power to arrest someone who is acting lawfully in order to prevent an apprehended breach of the peace. If we go to paragraph 58, the Supreme Court says, the term breach of the peace requires elaboration. Violence lies at the core of this concept. At common law, a breach of the peace has always involved danger to the person. And then quote some other cases. One case saying, the essence of a breach of the peace is violence. And another case from the Court of Appeal that says, a breach of the peace contemplates an act or actions which result in actual or threatened harm to someone. And finally, at paragraph 59, the Supreme Court said, as these authorities make clear, an act can be considered a breach of the peace only if it involves some level of violence and a risk of harm. It is only in the face of such a serious danger that the state's ability to lawfully interfere with individual liberty comes into play. Behavior that is merely disruptive, annoying, or unruly is not a breach of the peace. The description of behavior that's lawful and is merely unruly or disruptive, that describes the convoy. Honking of horns may be unruly or disruptive, but there is no hint of violence if one views the actual evidence. I appreciate that the mainstream media has been sowing a narrative that there's violence. Police keep saying that they're expecting violence. I'm not aware of any actual evidence that any violence has occurred. And you can see videos that I've shown previously in other videos, and speak to anyone who's actually been there, that this is a very peaceful, cheerful, a very Canadian gathering. So that brings me then to this issue of the Ottawa police threatening and then in fact seizing some fuel. And they appear to be doing this under the auspices of seizing offense-related material. There is some basis for this in law. If one's a party to an offense, they can be arrested as a party to offense. Parties are defined under Section 21 of the Criminal Code of Canada. And it requires a certain level of aiding and abetting. One can't just be passively standing by. They have to be assisting. So, in theory, giving food or fuel or comfort to other people can, in some circumstances, make one a party to an offense. For example, there's a case, Her Majesty the Queen in Jupiter, where an individual was convicted for giving food and drink to illegal immigrants because he was assisting these immigrants in being illegally in the country by providing them with that aid. However, what is the crime that police would try to base this on to say that people are parties to an offense? As I've already established, Section 63 doesn't apply. Causing a disturbance doesn't apply. Police seem to be trying to rebrand the peaceful exercise of the charter rights of assembly and expression as mischief. Mischief can come in a couple different forms, or willfully damaging property can be one. Willfully interfering with the enjoyment of property can be another. Stopping people in some circumstances could be interfering with their enjoyment of their property to sleep at night. However, my understanding, and this comes from many sources, is that the truckers have been ceasing all honking at nighttime. And they've been abiding by the injunction issued by the Superior Court recently, saying they can't honk their horns for 10 days. So, in my view, Mischief clearly doesn't apply either, and this is clearly unlawful activity on the part of the police. However, it's worth noting that, as I understand it, they only seized 1 or 2 slip tanks of fuel and a few jerry cans. And one can see videos of numerous people walking past police with jerry cans unmolested. So it's not entirely clear whether this was just a few officers who went off and did this, or a large number of officers are refusing unlawful orders, or whether it was a scare tactic, I'm not sure. Although with the slip tanks, apparently those were from farmers, and that actually is legitimate to seize dyed diesel. Apparently farmers have access to diesel with less or no taxes on it, and it's dyed a certain color, either red or purple, to know what it is. That is not allowed to be used on highways. So it would actually be a legitimate exercise of police powers to seize that. Now, finally, there's been a video of a gentleman being arrested by police that's become fairly viral, and people have been using this to argue that the police are acting like Gestapo or something like that in arresting this individual. So let's take a little bit of a look at this video. We won't watch the whole thing, but just a portion of it.
You don't have to answer his question, sir. You don't have to answer his question, sir.
He does have to.
No, he doesn't.
You want comments? Film me from the sidewalk.
Fuck off!
You want comments? Film me from the sidewalk.
Yeah, you see what he
Drive
did?
Yes, I know.
He swung at me.
You're abusing
Driver's
old
license.
men.
You swung at me.
That you're
Driver's
not a
If
Canadian.
I swung at you, it's on film, so you're fine.
What's your name and badge number?
2192 Jones.
Jones.
There. You have everything you need to have me fired.
Yeah,
for
look at
abusing
what
my
they're doing to
authority.
an old man.
Okay.
That's a citizen of Canada.
Shoot at the horn and pissed off.
Stop harassing old men. You don't have to show them anything.
Hey,
It's against the law. You just
Focus on your
Fuck you,
left.
I'm not
You're
gonna-
under arrest.
Hey, Joe.
for what? Hey,
Under arrest.
what are you doing?
Failing to ID. Well,
Hey, hey, that's assault. I've got it all on video.
You failed to ID.
Yeah, he failed to ID.
Hey, hey.
One might quite reasonably and justifiably have concerns over the attitude or the officiousness of this officer. He seems to be very impatient and, as I say, officious with this gentleman. However, that said, this person and whoever was videotaping it did themselves no favors whatsoever by being rude and belligerent to the officer from the very first, so that already made this interaction on edge and greatly increased the chances of a charge happening, because now being antagonistic, making an enemy out of the officer, any human being is naturally going to push against that and now start viewing that person as their enemy rather than a more neutral interaction. Viewers also need to be aware that the Highway Traffic Act requires that you produce your license and identify yourself. Section 33, sub 1 of the Highway Traffic Act of Ontario reads, "Every driver of a motor vehicle or streetcar shall carry his or her license with him or her at all times while he or she is in charge of a motor vehicle or streetcar, and shall surrender the license for reasonable inspection upon the demand of a police officer or officer appointed for carrying out the provisions of this act." And then Section 217 gives police the power to arrest individuals who refuse to identify themselves. Right here, arrest without warrant any police officer who, on reasonable probable grounds, believes that a contravention of any of the provisions of subsection, and among others, 33 sub 3, which is the offense section for failing to provide license, may arrest without warrant the person he or she believes committed the contravention. Therefore, when that gentleman stops taking his license out of his wallet, puts it back in his wallet and says, "I'm not identifying himself," he just gave that officer complete lawful authority to make an arrest. It may well have even been an excuse the officer was looking for. Do not break the law. Don't give police a valid reason to arrest you. And I've said this a number of times on this channel. If you're just walking down the street, if you're not engaged in a licensed activity such as driving, hunting, or fishing, you're under no obligation to identify yourself. You're under no obligation to speak to police in any way whatsoever. However, when you're doing a licensed activity, you must surrender your license. Now, this brings me to more general advice on how to deal with police. This channel's called Don't Talk TV because my general advice is don't talk to police. Certainly don't talk to them when they're investigating you for something, or it's a scenario where you think they're investigating you for something. And you don't have to talk to them because of Section 7 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms guarantees you that right to life, liberty, and security of the person, which includes the right to silence and the right to not self-incriminate. Now, if you're being arrested, you must identify yourself. So if you're being arrested, give them your name, your address, and your date of birth. It would be my recommendation. Strictly speaking, you don't have to give them your address or your date of birth, but you need to give them sufficient information to identify you. Give them that information, ask them to speak to a lawyer, and that should be it. And again, whenever in doubt, always speak to a lawyer to get advice specific to your situation. And above all, my advice is be polite and respectful to police. There's no law against being disrespectful to police, but tactically, in my view, being polite and respectful to police is going to be much better. Being rude and belligerent to them will never stop you from being arrested. It won't benefit you in any way. It might make you feel good to vent your spleen, but it's just going to get the officers back up. It's going to turn it into an us versus them situation. It's going to galvanize police into that band of brothers of police that we're dealing with these disrespectful, police-hating, anti-law and order protesters, so we're going to take them down. Don't fall into that. My recommendation is kill them with kindness, to borrow the common phrase. Be kind, be respectful. In my view, that's going to have much more impact on an officer, and officers who are on the fence, who are feeling some gnawing conscience at what's going on. If you're just taking that kind of Christian approach to them of turning the other cheek, that is going to have way more impact on them. Just as a quick anecdote, I was speaking to a friend the other day, and they'd been reading a book about Rwanda, and they said that the people who were involved in those massacres, killing people with machetes, they were far more disturbed, and it stuck with them through their whole lives, the memory of the people who died silently versus the ones who put up a fight. And it's just being a decent human being to be decent to others. Even if you feel they're infringing your rights, be the better person. Given all that, of course, this video is not legal advice. If you need legal advice, call a lawyer. Call another lawyer or myself. My phone number is listed below. If you have any show topics you'd like to see me cover, please send an email to the email address listed below, or leave a comment in the comment section. And if you found this video at all interesting, helpful, or informative, please hit the like button. Please share. Please subscribe. Again, I'm going to be in Ottawa. There will be a whole bunch of extra content. Instead of my weekly episode, I'll be doing live broadcasts. I'll be doing some extra episodes. So be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of that.